ask a question. Is this better? Not much. It is, okay. It is a tough crowd, but I'm used to you. Good evening. My name is Mellon Regis Savetta, and I would like to welcome you all in person or live stream to Saint Cecilia Parish. Our speaker this evening is Jim McDermott, a Jesuit priest ordained in 2003, correct? Good. He grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. He's a screenwriter, an editor, and a journalist. He has worked doing improv in New York City. He's worked as an English teacher, as our pastor has, and I love this one. Jim was a school bus driver on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and received the Bus Driver of the Year award from the students. I think when you go home, please Google that story. It's really a good one. He studied at Marquette and at Harvard and the Jesuit School of Theology in Weston. He has his MFA in screenwriting from UCLA. And I understand he has sold his first TV pilot. That will be very interesting. Right now, he resides in New York City, where he's an associate editor of America Magazine. I guess he multitasks very well. His writings are frequently in our parish bulletin. To me, he's an absolutely amazing priest in our church today. He's real, he's honest, and he tells it like it is. Our Rainbow Ministry here at St. Cecilia's is proud to present on World AIDS Day, Don't Call Me Father, My Name is Jim McDermott.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? It's the typical church. They give the priest the good mic, and everyone else, especially if it's a woman, she has to like struggle through, right? Sorry about that. It's so nice to be with you. I didn't know you were going to tell the bus driver story, but I'm going to tell it. I'll tell you the rest. So I got the bus driver of the year, but here's why I got bus driver of the year. Because I had to drive the seniors from Pine Ridge, where the school was, 2 hours to Rapid City. And we had a brand new bus, which in Red Cloud never happens. In Pine Ridge, the buses are always 20, 30 years old. This was a beautiful new bus. It was really maybe a month old, but like the yellow of the bus just like shone, if you can imagine that. And I had to pull into a gas station to get gas. And it was sort of a gas station where like, here's a set of pumps and here's a set of pumps. This is such a terrible story. And when I pulled in, almost right away, I heard like a, because one of those, those poles that protect the gas tank, I had hit that a little bit. Like not the front of the bus, but the side. And this is very indicative of me. My brain froze. And I thought, I think it's at the end of the bus, so I'm probably better off going forward than backing up. So I did, very slowly, and you just heard it. And everyone on the bus, their eyes were like this, like what is happening? And then finally, it was out. And we walked outside, and I had not only scratched the bus, I had cut into the metal. I had literally, and part of the bumper had fallen off of this brand new bus. So at the end of the year, I was given Bus Driver of the Year, not by the students, but by Bob Braveheart, who was the principal of the school. And the award was a can opener, which I still have and think about a lot. If it's okay, I have so much I want to say, and I'm so grateful to be with you, but if it's okay, I'd just like to start by inviting us all to just take a quiet moment and pray. And I want to pray especially today for the victims of the Club Q shooting in Colorado Springs. So if we could just take a moment. We can pray for Kelly, who was a mother to other queer people there. For Daniel, who wrote poetry. For Derek, who liked to play Brittany on his shifts. For Raymond, who had been with his girlfriend since middle school. For Ashley, whose whole world was her 11-year-old daughter. And for all who were injured and all their families, and all who now feel frightened. Some people wonder, why do we need rainbow flags in our schools or at our city halls? Why do we need to be able to talk about being gay or queer in our churches or schools? Or be able to check queer books out of the library? And for me, this is why. This is part of why. Because in many places in this country, being queer is still not only misunderstood, but dangerous. It's still viewed as depraved, or a crime, or a sin. Flags tell us where we're safe at times. Conversations help us understand that we're okay. Books help us understand who we are and that we're good. Thanks for that. I'm humbled to be here. Actually, I'm a little overwhelmed. About 2 years ago, with the permission of my Jesuit superiors, there were many of them involved, I wrote an article in the National Catholic Reporter about what it's like to be gay in the priesthood. And this is the first time since then that anyone has invited me to speak publicly about that. It's also the first time I've been in a church talking about being gay, which I was sort of like, lightning bolts, no? I thought he was good with it, and it seems like we'll see how it goes, but I feel like we're on the same page. It means a lot to me that you asked. It really does. I'm also intimidated to be here. I work at America Magazine, this Jesuit Catholic magazine in New York, and very recently, like maybe 2 weeks ago, we produced a documentary called People of God about parish life across the United States. It focused on 4 parishes, and yours was one of them. I don't know, have you had the chance to see that yet? No. So, like, quick sort of advertising thing, like if you go to America Magazine and Google People of God, but like, you guys should have a showing or something. If your parish does a showing, maybe we should provide the popcorn or something. I don't know, like, it really, I have to say, watching the stories of this place, hearing Mark Lippold, who I was so pleased to get to meet actually tonight, talk about why we need churches where gay people are welcome, or to hear John Uni and the digital team talk about this amazing online community that you support here, that's enormously inspiring to me, and I think to a lot of other people who've seen that film. For me, you are a model of what a religious community can be when it is creative and person-centered and paying attention to the Spirit. So I thank you for doing all that you're doing, and also for sharing it with us at America and the people who get to see it. I think you're helping us all imagine what the church could be as we look to the future. I'm also grateful that because you have this online community, I can be speaking tonight to all of you and also to people that are watching from wherever, some of whom I think are my friends and family. Hi, Mom. I'm pretty sure she would be among that group. It really, I'm sort of blown away by it. And and also, I actually got to meet her today. Betty Ann Asaro, who's a member of your parish. She lives in upstate New York, and she was featured in the documentary. and she became like everyone's favorite human being at America. And I was going to say, like, just a shout out, Betty Ann, if you're out there, but actually she was at America today, which was like, oh my God, a celebrity sighting, a parishioner, and it's Betty Ann from this parish. So a couple months ago, Mellon from the Rainbow Ministry group here sent me topics that they were interested in having me talk about, and I'm going to tell you what they were. And maybe it'll explain, like, I am usually a roamer, and this isn't that big a group, I could be moving around, but after these topics I was like, okay, I'm going to have to sit in one place, there's actually going to be a text, hopefully that won't be distracting. So here were the questions. Do you think the church will ever be able to change and truly welcome and bless all God's people? Why are the majority of gay priests hiding who they are when they could be helping the church by speaking out? And how do you view World AIDS Day from the perspective of a gay priest? So, just a few softballs. We should be done here in about 7 or 8 minutes. No, I'll do my best. I'm going to touch on each of those questions. I'm going to do them in the reverse order. I'm going to spend a lot of time especially on that middle question of queer priests, because it's the thing I know most about and something I've been thinking about for a long time. And I know we all have different terminology, and I really want to be respectful of that. The term in general you're going to hear me use is queer, even when referring to priests, and that's, I hope, out of an appreciation that when we're talking about priests who are not straight, it's not just gay priests, we're talking about bisexual priests, probably talking about asexual, non-binary, so just trying to be respectful of that. I may screw that up from time to time, and I apologize if I do, but that's what I'm thinking about. I've been told that the talks here generally take about an hour, which seems like a long time. I may not go that long, hopefully I won't. At the same time, as I was preparing this talk, I realized that on these topics, I feel a little bit like a 5-year-old who has just fallen in love with dinosaurs, and then you're forced to listen. There's a lot I'd like to say, but I'm also worried that at some point, you're just going to feel like, I'm just not that interested in the brontosaurus. I'm just not. I hope that won't be the case, but let me ask one other thing. I'm pretty loud. Are you able to hear me with the mic? It's fine. It's not like echoing on top of itself? Okay, great. Perfect. Well, so let me start with why we're meeting on this day, World AIDS Day. And I think ideally I would have liked to talk about this at the end and in a hopeful way. There are definitely aspects of where we are today in terms of HIV that are just inconceivable next to 30 years ago when I entered the Jesuits. They're very obvious things in a way. The idea that we have drugs that is able to keep HIV at bay to such a degree that it's undetectable, or that others, like PrEP, allow people of any orientation to be intimate with each other without the fear of getting sick. To me, that is a straight up miracle next to where we were 30 years ago. I wonder, to some extent, if those who didn't live through that can really appreciate how much of a miracle that is. How much people suffered and were afraid, and how much the very idea of intimacy was corroded by the fear and danger that we all felt for so long. At the same time, having entered a religious life, a religious order 30 years ago in 1992, maybe I don't fully appreciate these things either. Last year I gave one of the retired priests I live with a copy of Michael O'Loughlin's book, Hidden Mercy. I think Mark told me, Michael's been here, right? And Mellon was saying this too, yeah, maybe a number of times. He's our national correspondent at America Magazine, and he's an incredibly talented reporter. We're really lucky to have him. He had spent and continues to spend a lot of time interviewing Catholics who were involved in some way in helping people with HIV and AIDS from way back when, even to today. Catholic doctors and nuns and priests and others who got involved. And I thought this guy in my house, who is really passionate, I think, about change in the church and some of the problems that the church has, would really like it. But about a week later, he gave it back to me and he said, "Too sad." And I said, "What do you mean too sad? This is the story of Catholics who got involved. They're the ones who tried to help. And he said, yeah, but in between those stories are all the stories of the Catholics who got in the way or seemed content to watch people die. He told me, I lived through that era and I don't need to remember it again. When Pope Francis announced a couple months ago, maybe over the summer, his newest set of cardinals, a lot of attention, you might have noticed, was directed toward the American cardinal, Robert McElroy of San Diego, because he's very articulate and thoughtful when it comes to queer people. But amongst the bishops who were chosen to be cardinals were also a couple men who have vocally supported laws to jail queer people who commit homosexual acts, who in fact have pushed their legislatures to keep that legislation, and others who have supported conversion therapy. And afterwards I was reading news analysis about this, and they argued that these appointments reflect Francis's appreciation of the differences in culture, while his appointment of McElroy, like his support of New Ways Ministry or Jim Martin's work, show his care, his obvious care for queer people. But I'm thinking the queer people in those countries where those cardinals are, they probably feel a bit different about the situation that they're in. And I understand that progress comes slow, especially when we're talking about the whole world. But it's hard for me to understand how in 2022, we would continue to make allowances for positions that are actively putting people in danger and causing them harm. In our country, I find it's also discouraging this week to see the USCCB publicly coming out against marriage equality. Not because I expected them to change their position, because it's the law of the land. And no one is asking Catholic churches to change their policies on weddings, or their teachings on marriage and sexuality, or their hiring practices for that matter. There's no religious freedom issue here, and yet still they felt the need to produce a pretty lengthy document. To me, it feels unnecessary. It feels personal. And maybe more apropos of this day which we celebrate, in September, just a few months ago, a federal judge in Texas ruled that religious organizations don't have to cover HIV prevention drugs if they claim religious liberty. There are 38 million people in the world with HIV. There's over 1 million in this country. We still don't have a cure. To me, the idea of changing our policy or allowing people the opportunity to do that, it's reckless and it's dangerous and it's callous. So how do I view World AIDS Day as a Catholic priest? In part, I view it with regret. Probably that's the fundamental feeling I have. I have regret for the millions that have been lost. I look at that tapestry, and each of those, I don't know any of those people, but I'm immediately emotional for all of them and their families. And I also have great regret for the role that the church has played in their deaths and in the deaths of so many other people without really seeming to take any responsibility for it. Is the treatment of transgender people today really that different than the treatment of HIV and AIDS, people with HIV and AIDS 30 years ago, or even to some extent today? I don't think it is. And yet, we don't take any responsibility when some of those people kill themselves or live with depression. We will very happily help their parents mourn them or bury them, but we won't do the things that need to be done to help them. I also worry that while Pope Francis, I think, has been pretty revolutionary in his way of thinking about queer people or his support of people who are working with queer people, in some quarters in our church, including in this country, old attitudes seem to be resurgent. I worry, fundamentally, that on some level, they still don't care about us. And if I have hope, that was where this part ended. But when I saw that banner, I don't know what the right word is, somehow when I see the stars, and you can't see this, but it's like a big banner, and there's a star for every person that is being remembered that has died. And when I see those stars, that gives me hope. It's like the stars in the sky. They're there to remind us of what is possible and who we should be And where God is, who's with God? They're with God, right? And they maybe can guide us. Just like we're going to be talking about all this next month, about a star guiding other people. Well, we have stars too. I forgot that I'm old, so now I'll just put on my glasses a bit. So gay priests. Everywhere I've been since I was first a seminarian, I've had many peers who are gay. It's so many that the current positions of the church seem just bizarre to me. How can you have a priesthood that may be as much as 50% queer and still have the church talking about queer people in the way that it does? And I don't have like an actual statistic, but I'd say in most places I've been, 30 to 50% seems about right, sometimes a little more. Which I guess begs the subject that you asked about. Why is it that queer priests don't come out? And I have 5 little thoughts that I want to share. They're each drawn from my own experience, and I really emphasize that. I suspect some of what I say will resonate with other queer priests or queer people, but I would not presume to say my experience is representative of everyone by any means. I don't know what it's like to have a religious superior who openly hunts or persecutes queer priests or people, and some priests do. I didn't attend a seminary where you might get kicked out if they knew you were gay. And I've never been in a situation where I was afraid that if another priest knew I was gay, they would use it against me. In fact, part of why I can't wait for that day, which I believe is coming when it will be openly okay, or there will be more men that come out, is that there are so many stories out there waiting to be told. There are so many good men who have been carrying so much that needs to be said and shared, and whose experiences I believe will change us as a church. So knowing all that, why don't we come out? Here's the first reason, and I think these kind of all, in a way, they all kind of come back around. It's because, this won't be a surprise, we've been taught to fear our sexuality. When I wrote that article a couple years ago, I was really nervous about how it would be received. And I was actually mostly surprised. I was entirely surprised at how well people received it. But one thing I noticed that the day that it came out was that Jim Martin, who I work with and know well, he retweeted it, which is like, it's like the mother lode. If Jim Martin retweets something that you've said, it's like, oh my gosh, people suddenly know you exist. Like the spotlight comes on you. And the way he retweeted it, he framed my story in terms of me being not just a gay priest, but a gay celibate priest. Which to me seemed generally like repetitive, like that's kind of the deal, right? Not that everybody lives it perfectly, like in any other life or straight priest or anything, but like that's what you'd assume. But he explained to me that actually in many countries, being gay is understood as being sexually active. If you say you are a gay priest in these places, what they hear is, I am having sex with men as I write this, right? Frederick Martel is a writer, a reporter who did a book called In the Closet of the Vatican, which reported on homosexuality in the Vatican, and which I highly recommend. And he describes a similar phenomenon in Rome, that equation. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. That's like such a different sort of cultural way of thinking about things. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh wait, maybe there is a way that this makes sense in my own life. And it's in terms of a fear. I'd say until 2 years ago, I had been in a gay bar or any place that might be identified mostly as gay, queer, less than a half dozen times in my whole life. And the reason was, as far as I knew, it was just understood that to be a priest at a queer establishment, at a queer bar, was a cause for scandal. It was synonymous with cruising or having sex. You couldn't just be there. What else could you be doing at a gay bar? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that there are other things than just cruising and finding someone that go on at these places. To some extent, for me, it was the same with having gay friends that were not priests. There was often a low-level anxiety in me, like I was doing something wrong, or would be soon. I once heard Jim give a talk about the spiritual life of queer people, and one of the things that really knocked me over was this really obvious thing that he said. Queer people actually have spiritual lives. Which is to say, they don't come to church, we don't come to church to talk about our sex lives. We actually come to church to talk about God. We have more in our life. We have many dimensions, like everyone else. In the church, we have so long equated sexuality with sex. One thing that can mean, I think, when you are a priest and have made promises to be celibate and chaste, is that you don't have a good way to get in touch with your queerness. Not a way that does not seem fraught with danger, that does not seem sinful. You don't feel, or I didn't, like I could go to places where queer people are, where gay men are. And just socially, as human beings, most of us, all of us, I think, need contact like that to understand ourselves, to feel okay with ourselves. Books and movies can help. Armistead Maupin, Barney Frank, they did a lot for me, the books that they've written. And if I think in terms of TV shows, Ryan Murphy has done a lot for me. We're Here and the drag queens on that show on HBO, Bob the drag queen, Eureka O'Hara, and Shangela, they've helped me, but that is not enough. They can only take us so far. That's one reason, I think. Just my opinion. A second reason, which I think is kind of the reverse of the first, and I think it's the answer I used to give the most and that I often heard other people give the most, is that a coming out is unnecessary because I'm already out, really. From the moment I entered the Jesuits, as I said, I found myself in the presence of pretty healthy and wonderful gay men, queer men, who had lots of life experience from before they entered and a tremendous forthrightness and humor about their lives. And just their presence in my life was by far the most important thing in helping me figure out I was gay and what that meant. Again, community is everything. When I did finally figure it out, I didn't know when I entered. It was actually, and this doesn't really make sense anymore, but this tells you what the 90s were like. I was asked when I entered, on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is straight and 10 is gay, where are you? It's like, right, exactly. That scale does not make any sense. No. I was like 5. I don't really know. I'm not really freaked out about it, but I spent too much time in my books, right? Yeah, so it took a couple years in the society to help me really figure it out. And when I did, those same Jesuits were there for me. They were the ones that helped me process that and to help me see that this was like a cause for celebration. This was a gift. And also that it was kind of hilarious. The rom-coms have it right. Falling in love, being attracted to people, hilarious, ridiculous. I feel lucky that I figured out I was gay in the Jesuits, and that I had the friends and the superiors around me, gay and straight both, who had such wisdom and love and could be honest about their own journeys. Never underestimate the value of people around you who are messy or whose lives seem messy, because they teach you that your own messes are not the end of the world, that being queer is another way of saying being human, and that we never have it all figured out. We're all on the road. But being in communities where, say, half the men were queer at various times, and in some cases you'd also be out to the straight people too, right? You're just all living together. It's pretty natural eventually to think, I'm not in the closet. People know I'm gay. That's how I felt for a long time and was very happy with it until Mellon mentioned I went to graduate school at UCLA. I did a screenwriting degree there, which was this incredibly loving and supportive community of writers who didn't blink about queerness. And then I got to work in the film business for a bunch of years, which was much the same. And I found I was actually sort of overwhelmed by it all. like in the Writers Guild, which is like a union for writers, right? You could check a box on their website to say that you were queer and be a part of this subcommittee of queer writers. But that information would be available to the public. And for years, I could not bring myself to do it because I thought, what if a bishop or a superior finds out that I'm telling people I'm gay? What if they see that and or somebody screenshots it? And this is how crazy it was in my brain. How many bishops do you know that are trolling the Writers Guild of America website, you know? I wish they were. I wish there was like, oh, that Damon Lindelof, who is this man? He's always doing religious stuff. Is he married? Maybe he has a vocation, you know? I mean, I worked as a writer on a TV show too called Preacher, and writers' rooms are like the Wild West in terms of all of this. People talk about everything going on in their lives, or at least in some rooms they do, including their sex lives. And one day, before work started, we were literally going around the room. I don't know how this started, but it's very much our room. Just people telling like their first sexual experience. And it's interesting, like stuff like that might sound crazy, but then it ends up helping the writing process. Like you'll suddenly you'll bring ideas. And anyway, when it got to me coming around the room, someone else in the room immediately said, he doesn't have anything to say, he's a priest. And they just skipped over me. I know. I was really upset. But you know what? I was more relieved because it meant I didn't have to say anything. And that was when I began to see something's not right here. Maybe I had not left the closet after all. Maybe it was just a bigger one with more people in it. It's funny, this show that I was working on was a horror show, and that's actually sort of an amazing horror concept. Like, oh my God, this isn't paradise. It's like Three's Company, and it goes on forever, and we can't escape. I also started to notice, I sort of like looked back from that moment. I would look back on experiences in community, past and present, and I also saw things that I thought, is this right? What is this? Like in big communities, when you've got 30 or 40 men, it can happen in smaller ones too. There can be a self-ghettoizing thing that kind of happens, even if most of the people in the community are queer or more than half. Like there'll be cliques of the men that want to, gay men that want, or queer men that want to hang out together and always eat together. Not necessarily bad, but when it's too persistent, you begin to say like, they must not, or we must not feel safe or something, like something's not right here. And when enough alcohol can get flowing with me and some of my queer brothers, you could also watch us sort of eat each other alive. With sniping and gossiping and tearing each other down, even privately like celebrating one another's losses or maybe helping incur them. There have been moments in my life where there have been moments with other queer men in community where I felt like I was in a priest version of Boys in the Band. Actually, when I first wrote this, when I was coming up with that, I felt like I was in a priest version of a boy band, which was maybe my wishful thinking. Like, that seems much better. I don't care who you are, where you're from. In most cases, I'd say that behavior was not about like bad people. It's about what you unconsciously do when you feel penned in. When you feel trapped, what do? You lash out. You try to escape. You rage. Would I have recognized any of that if I hadn't gone to UCLA? If I hadn't had the chance to work in the film business and had the experiences I did and the friends and bosses and mentors that I did? I don't think so. And this, in a sense, goes back to the problem with gay priests feeling unable to venture out into the queer community in a regular and healthy way. We help each other into life. There's a line from Game of Thrones, and if you're not a Game of Thrones fan, I promise I'll explain it. A Targaryen alone in the world is a terrible thing. And the Targaryens are just a family of people. They're dragons, whatever. I think it's the same for queer people. We need the support of our family, our queer community. But also, and maybe more importantly, our community helps us figure out who we are and what we can be. It is the path to our liberation. The Jesuits have helped me to accept that I was gay and to be okay with that. But it has been queer and straight people out in the world who have been teaching me to consider what that actually might mean for my life. To see being gay as a part of living my life, rather than an issue that comes up from time to time, like dandruff or a snowstorm. There's a phrase everyone quotes from St. Irenaeus, "The glory of God is man fully alive." In a way, my lay friends are the ones that keep asking me, both in their words and in the way they live their lives, yes, and are you fully alive? Are you really? A third answer to why we don't come out. Actually, how's the brontosaurus? Are we doing all right? Yeah? You're doing okay? Okay, all right. A third answer to why we don't come out. Maybe it's the one that you were alluding to, the ministry group, and saying that we're hiding, though that is not generally how I would frame why gay priests don't come out, is that we feel like we have so much to lose. Some people have asked me, some really good friends, and have told me that this is their theory even, if I thought I entered to avoid having to deal with the fact that I was gay. I wouldn't be surprised if that played some part in the equation. Although I think it's equally likely that on some unconscious level, I had a hunch that the priesthood would be a place where I would find a community of supportive queer and straight people. But those are like deep down unconscious things, and I don't want to speculate. People enter the priesthood for multiple reasons all at once, just like they get married for multiple reasons. And part, I think, of growing into your identity as a priest or a brother is coming to accept all of those reasons, rather than just the parts that are easy to preach about or to talk about in a vocation video. But that takes time. But whatever people's reasons for entering, I would say, I think that most priests and brothers have stayed because we have had powerful experiences of collaboration and service as priests, of walking with people in confession, at funerals, of blessing children and saying Mass, being invited into families' lives, being invited into your lives, and also of being in relationship with God, who is filled with surprises, We have known vulnerability and mercy and love. Our stony hearts have been broken open again and again. In a sense, the church makes a deal, I think, with queer clergy. You can have all of that. You can have that job, you can have those relationships, this vocation that you feel called to, all of these things that have, in many cases, made us who we are, these moments of gratitude and humility and wonder. As long as you keep silent about this one element in your life that doesn't really even matter anyway if you're keeping your vows. And honestly, early on, it seems like a pretty fair deal. But of course, there's a threat in all of that from the beginning. Say nothing, and you can have it all. You can try to be a bishop, you can try to be a president, whatever. But if you rock the boat, it will all go away. Your friends will likely distance themselves or turn on you, lest they themselves are implicated. And your bishop or superior may reassign you, or worse. The calculus of that, I can't sort of overstate this. The potential danger, it only gets more intense the older you get. But you don't know that when you're 30. If you're kicked out or you're sort of pressured to leave when you're 30, you got your whole life ahead of you. But if that happens when you're 55 or 60, what can you be hired to do? How will you live? It's the very same issues that lay people face, right? That's one of the darkest things about it, about this silencing, is that the silence is a way, intentional or not, to keep people who have a lot of things in common from even knowing that they each exist. And so maybe it's out of guilt or desire to try to somehow overcome that? Both. I think queer clergy often try to help in other ways. We talk in code about how God accepts all people for who they are. And maybe by coincidence, we do that on Pride Sunday. When we meet people in confession or in spiritual direction who are queer and are beating themselves up about being queer, we try to help them. If we're really brave, like the Franciscan friar Michael Judge, who worked with firefighters, died at 9/11, but also was one of the first people to set up an HIV/AIDS clinic in New York City. You know, you do things like that, which sort of signal who you are. And I gotta tell you, there's no way his superiors and people he lived with were happy about that. No way all of them were, and I bet there are still some that aren't happy about that. It's a crazy thing. If you have a PhD in English and you talk a lot about Shakespeare and you want to have conferences all the time, people say, well, that's his thing. That's great. But if you're queer and you say, I want to have a conference or I want to help queer people, they say, that's his hang-up, right? Totally different standard. But this like trying to help in different ways, it can become another version of it's not necessary for me to come out. Because we think we are helping as we are. Maybe that we're even doing more good than we'd be able to if we were out. I was certainly told that if I came out, there would probably be jobs that I would never be able to get. And I was not told that as a threat. It was just like, let's be realistic. You're not going to be put in charge of a province if you're an out, gay priest, right? And I was like, cool, don't want that job. Like that was like, which is sort of like a revelatory thing. Like there are certain things you say, oh, if that's how they think of me, then I don't want that job anyway. That's like a big change of, big realization that like, you used to accommodate because you thought you should have those things or be wanting to do those things. And then you realize, oh no, like, it would be so horrible to have that job and have to be hiding. I also know many priests who do lots of different kinds of things, amazing things, who I have been told, they've told me, I've heard, have been warned or told at various times, don't come out, or told you really can't, because it will undermine your ability to do your work, or it will actually harm the work or destroy the work you've been doing. Which is a lot to put on someone. I don't know how people in that position do it. If they really want to come out and are told, absolutely not, because it will ruin everything. Like, my God, what about God? I thought that was the guy in charge, right? He's the one that sort of makes the fruit grow, and so, it's not all dependent on us. And I also find that when these situations happen, it can be the case that the guy in question is suddenly on his own, rather than a member of a community or a diocese, an organization that supported him, that's made commitments to him. You know what might stop a guy coming out from losing his job or having his ministry ruined? Seeing his fellow priests and superiors stand up for him when he's threatened. And not just say, well, he wanted to do that. Like, no. Stand with him. I give the provincial superiors who agreed to my article, also Matt Malone at America, who hired me, so much credit for supporting me. I was sort of stunned by it, actually. Others have not been so lucky. And maybe the fact that I was a screenwriter and that's sort of an unusual ministry for Jesuits helped me. I was not in like an essential work already. Fourth reason, just two more, I promise. Shame. Hello, shame. I remember you. There's a healthy self-skepticism, I think, in good priests. Straight, queer, whatever. We tell ourselves nobody is coming to church to hear us talk about being gay or maybe about us at all. I had a great a liturgy teacher here in Boston at Weston Jesuit School of Theology in Cambridge, Tom Kane, a Paulist, who used to say, like, nobody's here to hear about your prostate. Nobody wants to know how big it is or the time you had that scare, or they're just not. Church is not about us, the priests. I still have never mentioned being gay in a homily, and I don't know when exactly I would, when it would be appropriate to do so. You know, my job, as I see it as a priest, is like being a midwife or a marriage counselor between people and the God who loves them. And my job is to help them connect. And I can do that job, it can be informed by my experiences as a gay man without me having to talk about it all the time, or at all. But on the other hand, this is where I don't know. I've told stories about my family. I've told stories about things that have happened to me if I think it helps break open the gospel. So why is talking about being gay, definitely narcissism or worse, but talking about this thing my dad said can be a good example? I do wonder if it doesn't point to some like deeper shame in me, sometimes in us, a belief that being gay is indeed bad, like acceptable but not great. When I was working in Hollywood full time, or going to school and then working there, I was constantly waiting for people to reject me, specifically because I was a priest. And given all the baggage of the church, this is what I would tell people: why would you want to have me around? Like, help me understand this. It was actually really unsettling that I got into UCLA. I just was like, how is that possible? Not because I didn't think I was talented, but because I thought there's all these other things you have to deal with. It was the same when I would apply for jobs, or even at UCLA. The way I was treated was really great. Actually, one of the moments of greatest relief in my time in LA was when someone actually did reject me for a job after they heard that I was a priest. I was like, yes, you get it. You know, I am a bad dude. You don't want me around. And I always thought that shame was actually not about being gay. I thought it was about getting ordained to discover that actually for the last how many years that people have been abusing children and then hiding it and moving those kids around, and now I'm a part of that. That's what I thought it was. And I think that is part of what it is. But it's also, I think, it's just difficult to accept a part of yourself that you are told over and over you can't talk about. It doesn't matter how supportive your community is at some point. In fact, I think supportive communities in a way become part of the problem at times. Because instead of saying that silencing is wrong, they teach you that you can survive it. It's terrible. It is terrible, yes, but you're wonderful, and we can manage this. It sounds good, but it is not a path to happiness. Here's the last reason why I think a lot of gay priests don't come out. I think it's both the scariest and actually the most thrilling. We don't know what lies on the other side of making that decision. Like literally, what will happen if we come out? I can remember the morning that article was coming out, like, what is my life about to be? No idea. Part of it is about all those threats, right? It's, what will they do to me if I do this? What will I lose? But it's also just the sheer mystery of it all. You've been holding a part of yourself back for decades, maybe your whole life. What is going to happen when you let it out, even a little? Who will you be? What will you want? Today, I have nothing but gratitude for that writer's room and the experience in that writer's room, and for that writer who skipped me over. She did me a huge favor. I love her. Her name's Sarah Goodman, and I love her. But that moment, unbeknownst to her or even me at the time, it completely turned my life upside down. And it took a long time to work out the shame and the fear that it uncovered. Believe it or not, writing an article about being gay in the priesthood, I thought was going to be sort of the end point of my journey, that it would be sort of over then, because I had been on this journey and I felt like this is the culmination and then it will be done. It has not worked out that way. fact, I'd say just the act of writing that article, like I learned things about the Society of Jesus and about the church just in the process of writing it. I was made aware of dynamics I didn't really see before. Like the way that the terms like prudence or discretion are often used to sort of convince you to be quiet. Because nobody wants to be imprudent, nobody wants to be indiscreet. I feel like that article also made me reevaluate my own personal history and made me see things from my life, memories that I wasn't really aware of before. Here's a crazy one. When I was early in the Jesuits, my mom has 9 friends, they're called Club. They went to high school together, they've always been friends, and they kind of like, when they all had kids, we were all kind of together at times, and probably my mom's best friend, Patty, her daughter Julie got married, who was almost like my sister. So I'm at this wedding, and I offered Julie's grandma to have a dance, because that's what the priest does, right? The priest is gonna dance with the grandma, right? And she said, sure. I wasn't even a priest yet. And we start dancing, and she says to me, and here we all thought you were gonna be a ballerina. And then when I remembered that, I was like, I'm so angry now. You guys knew I was queer so much before I did. You could have done me a big favor if you had just told me. But more than anything, I feel like coming out has radically changed my needs. It has made me so much hungrier for community, and for specifically, and I live in a great Jesuit community. They are wonderful human beings, but it's made me very hungry for the queer community that I had cut myself off from for so long. About 6 months after I wrote that article, I moved to New York City, where I lived once before, and I started going to this queer sing-along bar called Marie's Crisis in Greenwich Village. Does anybody know Marie's? Some Marie's fans? Yeah, of course you do, yeah. I knew them because during the pandemic, they were doing 5 hours of performance every single night on Facebook. And I sort of stumbled into them and then was like, oh my God, this is how I'm gonna get through this for 2 years or whatever. But like I said, I had lived in New York before for 6 years and was very comfortable with myself as a gay man then. But I had never even considered going to Marie's for fear of how it would look or what might happen. If you've been to Marie's, that's such a hilarious thing to be worried about. What might happen is you're gonna sing really poorly and maybe drink too much. That's what's gonna happen. And I do that anyway, it's even after writing that article and moving to New York, for that first maybe 6 months, I was still scared. Is it okay? Is this okay? I can't even tell you how much that place has helped me. How much it has helped me to have that place, to be welcomed into that community. How much I have gained from those people and the friends that I've made there and the things they've been willing to share with me of their lives. Also, just how incredible it is to be sort of accepted as I am. I'll tell you, when I went there, did not tell people I was a priest, did not want to tell people that I was a priest, both because it's like, this is gonna be weird for them, it's also gonna be weird for me. I didn't come here for that. But once you get to know people, right, you're friending people on Facebook, and then they're like, why are there all these videos of you saying mass? What is that about? And one of my friends is like, new people, he's introducing people to me, then being like, and he's a priest. And it's like, oh no, don't do that. But actually, that ended up being this enormous help, because in a sense, because no one blinked about it. No one cared. And if you think about it, it's late nights, cheap drinks, show tunes. I'm sure I was not the first priest to go to Marie's Crisis, right? And I won't be the last. But also they just that community, it's interesting. That community seems to be built around accepting people for where they are, not just who they are, but where they are. You can be messy, you can be a drunk, you can be strange, and still they make room for you, which I've come to think of as an essentially queer thing. There's a great book by, I think maybe she's Episcopal, a minister named Elizabeth Edmond. It's called Queer Virtue. And she talked about how being queer is, it has an essential morality of not accepting marginalization, not marginalizing others. Like, that's part of what it means to be queer. And I feel like this bar has been teaching me a lot about that as well. She's also, this is a great book to read. She also talks about, isn't it interesting, that's sort of a God thing too, not marginalizing people. Maybe there's a way of thinking about religion that is also queer. I'm just about done. About a month ago, I was in London, which is a place I've been many times before, but I'd never spent any time in Soho for the same reasons I've been telling you. Didn't want to be seen to be skirting my vows, even though I'm in a different country. It's really amazing the degree at which I have spent my priestly life viewing other gay men as a danger or as a threat to my vows. Like, I'm so embarrassed and appalled by that. And this time I visited Soho a lot, especially one bar which I was really fascinated by. It's called Compton's, and what fascinated me was it's very mixed. Like, there'll be the young guys who are kind of doing their thing on the prowl, and then there are old guys who are just like sitting having a drink. And they're really there for each other, and maybe also to ridicule the young guys, maybe like, are they on Grindr? What's going on there? You know, it's like, it's just a really diverse community. And again, for me, it was like, oh my God, I'm like home. Like, I just feel so at home in this group. I'm sure some of the people I talked to there were like, who is this guy? What is this about? And how could I explain to them that I've basically shut this part off of my life for 50 years? And so now I'm trying to figure out how to bring that part of me out. And they seem to be a lot farther along in that than I am, and I'm just hoping that something will rub off. There's the famous story of Pandora and her box. I don't know how much you know about that story. The version we all know comes from the 7th century BC, and it's a very warped Adam and Eve story. Prometheus, he steals fire from the gods. They don't like that, so they make the first woman, Pandora, and she is basically a time bomb. She's beautiful, she's seductive, and once Prometheus's brother marries her, she opens this jar, which might have been hers, might have been his. It's filled with nightmares, and it destroys everything. The Greeks really love women, they really, my God. But what's interesting is, I was sort of like, that story feels very similar to some of what I'm talking about, but I wonder, is that the real story? And it turns out, before Hesiod, this guy that made Pandora into that nightmare, she was Mother Earth. Her name actually means she who has all the gifts or who gives all the gifts. I think another reason or another way of saying why priests don't come out, which circles back to the beginning, is that we have been taught this sense that we are both Pandora and the box. That our sexuality represents potentially all of these bad things that we have to hold back. And it's not just to protect ourselves, but to protect the church. Especially, you think of the constant crisis the church has been in for, since 2002? To imagine that you might add to that, even if it's not about sexual abuse, it's just a lot. But in truth, I find it's the things that we do bury or hold back, the ones that may have been really good at the start. If you hold them back, they go bad, they rot. And in my experience, most of the things we're given, if they're released into the world, even if they seem pretty bad or hard, they eventually become gifts. I understand the fear, but there is also a lot more waiting on the other side. So this last question, will the church ever change? It's funny, I feel like the implied answer is no. But I don't think that's the case. I think the church will change because it has to. It's the only position, sort of accepting queer people is the only position that matches with the life of Jesus. It's the only way that actually fits with actually the way Jesus treated people. On this issue, I feel like the church is swimming against the current. And you can do that for a long time. We have. But you can't do it forever. I just don't think it's possible. I also think things are changing in some ways already. I think Jim Martin is an example of that. I think some of the things Pope Francis has done. I think some of the conversations in Europe about gay marriage or blessing gay marriages by bishops saying this, or conferences of bishops saying that, those are hopeful signs. But I also, and maybe this is narcissistic, I wonder if part of the answer to that question does lie with queer clergy. When did the APA change its definition of homosexuality? When did they stop saying it was a mental illness or a deviation? When gay psychologists started coming out to their peers and talking about their experience. There's an amazing This American Life episode called 81 Words about that. It's incredible. Also, I'm not in a collar, I know, and I can be a little secular maybe, but I believe in the Holy Spirit. And when you see so many priests that are queer, you have to ask yourself, what is the Spirit saying here? My interpretation, and it's just an interpretation, is that God has some use for us. It's not just a coincidence, that our identities are somehow gifts that we're meant to share. Maybe we're called to the seminaries precisely to help others in our church to understand that homosexuality is not a sin, is not depraved, is a blessing and an opportunity. Maybe we're meant to be the means for queer people to have shelter in a world that is often not providing that, is often threatening them, threatening us. Maybe the gift is, as I've been saying kind of throughout this talk, that being queer means that it invites us out into the world and invites the world into the church. I'll tell you one thing, the fear that we've been taught and that a lot of us live with a lot of the time, it just can't be from Jesus. There's just no way, because Jesus is always the one saying, be not afraid. And, a couple gay priests, queer priests, may be a coincidence. A couple hundred in every major city or most? I don't think so. At least for me, I can say that sort of 2 years in, I am much happier for having come out. It is scary at times. It's messy. I don't know where it's all going at times. But it's been so liberating too. I have a sense that there is a lot more in me than I knew about, than I ever realized, and that God is sort of waiting for me there. There's the last thing, I promise. We've gotten way past the brontosaurus. We're onto the triceratops. It's rough. I promise this is the last thing. And it's maybe a total disaster, for which I apologize ahead of time. There's a musical playing in New York right now called The Man of No Importance. It's the story of a middle-aged Irishman in a small town in the early 20th century who works on a bus and reads poetry and runs the theater company. And during the show, for the first time in his life, he sort of finally faces his sexual identity and tries to have a relationship with somebody. It backfires, the whole town finds out, his family finds out, and it sort of goes on from there. But by the end, he's reached a kind of new sense of self, in large part because the community sort of brings him there. And at the very end, he sings this very short song to himself, which I just saw the show not that long ago, and I just felt wow, this captures so much of my experience of coming out. And also the feelings I would want to express to any queer clergy. And also, I feel like it's the sentiment that our church, I know our church is yearning to express. It's getting, a lot of other things are getting in the way, but I feel like this is what the church wants to say. So I'm going to try to sing it. Right, exactly, I know. It's probably a disaster. Okay, it's very short. You thought you knew a bit of life. You had no clue. You took a step. The world came crashing down on you. And what you feared the most of all happened. Well, now you've come to. Welcome to the world. Welcome to the world at last. You've been taking tickets far too long, watching the world rolling past. And there's music like nothing you've heard, my friends, if you just let it play. There are glasses to raise in the praise of surviving the day. For life is clearly something that we can't rehearse. It's dangerous and beautiful and free as verse. And rather than avoid it, high time we stood in its way. Welcome to the world. We are in the world. That should be enough. And that's all there is to say. You're very kind. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think I sing at the end to sort of get the pity clap, so I really appreciate that. Thank you for that. I don't know, do we have time for questions? I hope we do. I don't know, it's up to you guys. I'm here. If you want to ask questions, there's a mic, I can answer questions. Yeah, please. Jim. Yeah. You call me whatever you want. Yeah. Right. Right. The synodal process, it's definitely building, yep. Yeah, no. That's a great question. Yeah, so the question, sure, I'm not sure I know what's going on. Oh, thank you. Did you want to add to that? Sure, absolutely. And also, I'm not sure how well you guys can hear in the streaming verse. So the question was, the church is involved in this synodal process, which is like a 2-year conversation where at every level, first at the area of parishes, and then dioceses, and then continents, and then eventually the whole church is going to come together and talk about what are sort of the issues in the church right now. I don't think it's the same as Vatican II, but I think it has the potential to be. I don't think we know what it will do. I feel like, God willing, that Francis is still here with us and is there for the whole thing. I think at the end of that process, it's going to be like some of the other meetings that he's had, where there will be some attempt at synthesis that will hopefully be sort of nourishing and challenging for people. But what that looks like, I feel like we're all sort of I don't know what's happening, or where is this going to go? Which that's actually part of what I like about Francis, is that he sort of trusts the process, and he trusts in conflict too. I think that's a really big thing that's hard for us to get our heads around, that he's fine with groups of bishops just having it out. He's not oh no, it's like Thanksgiving dinner, we can't fight around the table. It's no, we need to represent our actual opinions. That is how the Spirit works, not in spite of the Spirit. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, yeah, I mean, I think every bishop and then every conference will have its own set of things. I think there'll be a really wide variety. Yeah. Should I get that mic? Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I'm just going to grab the mic if somebody else. I don't mean that you guys aren't trapped. So if we're done, that's fine too. If people have questions though, I'm happy to take a couple. Yeah, here. Please.
Because I survived the AIDS crisis. And today, the church here, there's nobody AIDS here. The ones who were waiting, we buried our friends, we were all young.
Yeah. Hmm. That's your sense, is that it's that they don't need this. They're not, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, I appreciate that comment. And actually, thank you. I mean, thank God you survived. Thank you for being here, and thank you for saying that. I wondered at times, I mean, I don't have any answers, but I just wonder how we help younger queer Catholics to be in touch with the past. Like, how do we invite them, or how do we get them interested? Like that, like what happened, there are interesting and important things happening now, but there were so many then too, and there's so much to be learned and so much sacrament in that. There's so much sacrament in the stories and the experiences that we went through, right? And that, yeah, I don't know. It is certainly, I mean, I often write about this, and I think they're probably like, God, you got a pretty dark opinion of the church, but it's like, there's like 13% of young people of Catholics that are going to church. Like, that's not like, oh, I think that, we're gonna have to figure that out. It's like, oh no, we're falling off a cliff. I don't know what, I've written this, I don't know what the church looks like in 20 years or 30 years. I just don't know, like, how can it be this? Like, if no one's coming, yeah. Sorry to be so bleak, but I really appreciate your comment. Other questions or comments? Yeah. Wow. I really appreciate that. I'm just going to repeat that question. Like, so the comment was that actually what I was talking about queer priests and the issues that we go through is not all that different than other queer people, that these are similar issues. I can't tell you how much it means for me to hear that, because I'd say my biggest fear in talking about this is like, it's kind of a niche, like, well, this should be a talk for queer priests. Like, why am I giving this talk beyond that? And so I was very worried. I was hoping, like, at the very least, you get a window into this other world. So to hear that it might actually reflect other queer people's experience, that makes me feel relieved and sad. Huh. Yeah, it's funny. So a guy I used to live with, an older guy who was very wise and very holy, but then this one time in a community meeting, people were talking about like sharing things with provincials, which is like the major superior or even local superiors. And he was like, I never do that. I never tell them what's really going on. And in the Jesuits, I think you're more likely to face a safe audience. And we were like, what? You're like the saint among us. He said, no. You got to see who they are first before you share that kind of stuff. And even then, you know, it was like, wow, you know, it's so complicated. Anyway, thanks for sharing that. Other comments or questions? Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Just killed it. It's great. We were all waiting for you to say something. Thank you. Thank you for having me.